And we are back on the Zero Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow, and we're going to check in with our good friend Mike Elk, who is on the road in Wyoming. Mike, you will know from his previous appearances on the show, is one of my favorite labor reporters in the country, and God knows we don't have enough of those. He does a fantastic job at the Payday Report. It's paydayreport.org, I believe. Well, correct me if I'm wrong.
Paydayreport.com.
Paydayreport.com. I made a deliberate mistake so that people will remember. And paydayreport.com, which you should read and contribute to. And he's going to tell us, I'll learn as you learn, what he's up to. So, Mike, always good talking to you, man.
Well, it's been good. I've been out here in Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana doing lots of things. I've been recovering from long COVID for a couple months now. And one of the things that complicates it is living in a place like Pittsburgh. You know, I love Pittsburgh. It's my hometown. It's the Paris of Appalachia. Nowhere I really love more in the world except maybe Rio de Janeiro. And you know, it's been a struggle because in the winter in Pittsburgh, we have these air inversions where all the pollution of some of the last remaining steel mills gets trapped. And Pittsburgh is the only city on the East Coast with an F quality lung, with an F grade from the American Lung Association. So I've been out here visiting some friends. I was visiting a friend who was a park ranger down in the Grand Tetons. I was out yesterday at a fish camp for the disabled in Ennis, Montana, where this guy has built equipment so that quadriplegics can go fishing with adaptations.
Awesome.
And has set up special float rafts. And I stayed with this guy. He was about 74. I stayed with him for a couple days. And man, that was a real treat, you know, being with someone who's spent their whole life trying to figure out ways to improve the quality of life of disabled folks and build. You know, he invented some equipment actually so that quadriplegics could go fly fishing.
That's amazing. You know? I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was out there. I've been visiting in Helena with a group called Labor Lab, which is set up to track union busting. And now we're here in Yellowstone to take on some union busting. One of the sad parts of our national parks is how privatized they've become. It used to be to work in a national park or give tours, you had to be a tour guide or a park ranger, and you had to go through all kind of federal training and you had federal wage standards. But over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen the rise of these private contractors. And what's happened with these private contractors is that they can really dictate the labor conditions in a park. You have one company here that we're investigating called Delaware North. Delaware North is actually owned by the family of Chris Jacobs, who's the congressman from a Republican congressman from Western New York, out there, that gerrymandered district outside of the suburbs of Rochester and Buffalo up there. And Delaware North actually owns the copyright to the name Yellowstone Park.
Really?
Yeah. So they own the copyright and the trademark. And what they've been doing here is, you know, what's really become quite startling on this trip into the Rocky Mountain West is that there's been a huge, huge issue of rent skyrocketing out here.
Yeah.
Doubling in some places because of the pandemic. During the pandemic, many people that were working from home decided, you know, I'd rather go live in the Rocky Mountains in Montana, where property taxes are low. And so people from New York and LA and all kind of places are moving here. And it's become a real issue. You know, you have people on some of these windy roads commuting more than an hour every day to get to work each way, which is a lot for these regions. I was just in Ennis, Montana, population 900, but in the summer that can swell up to 2,000 or 3,000. And in Ennis, you know, the local grocery store owner bought several cottages, little tourist cottages, just so that the workers could find somewhere affordable to live because of how high the turnover was. And, you know, what's happened here is that, you know, we're in West Yellowstone. We're about an hour from anywhere. And, you know, last year, 2 years ago, there were a bunch of folks union organizing here at this group called Delaware North as tour guides. These are people that are going out in the winter cold, taking people on snowmobile tours, hiking tours, a very demanding work. You have to look out for people's safety. You have to know a lot about what's going on. And, they were union organizing. They were all fired and thrown out of the company-owned housing here in West Yellowstone in the middle of the winter, which is really, really tough in a place where, you go into some of these places, like we were just in Jackson, Wyoming, right? And you go out into some places in Idaho that are even an hour away, you're looking at rent of $1,400 a month easily. And Bozeman, right up the road, Bozeman, Montana, the average one bedroom now costs $1,750, and that's doubled almost over the last 2 years.
So we're
seeing the political economy of these places change dramatically.
Yeah, and these are mostly locals, right? Or are these people that have come in from other parts of the country?
These are mainly people that have come in from other parts of the country. I mean, people come from all over the country, all over the world to these national parks, and the workforces are often seasonal. They're contingent. They're precarious. I mean, even for a seasonal national park ranger who has federal certification, they're making $16.65 an hour. And then often these folks have some sort of company housing or park service provided housing. And these folks have a lot of power. These concessionaires like Armark, Santerra, and here Delaware North, and how these parks are run. Nowhere else in the world. If you go to France or you go to Chile, you're going to have a government official come out and explain to you the beauty of these parks. It's only and it'll be much cheaper. I mean, you're looking at, I wanted to go to Old Faithful, but to catch a snow coach there, we're looking at $150 trip.
Really?
Which is totally unaffordable. Yeah. So this problem of the privatization, this problem of the gentrification, I mean, these are our national treasures that should be accessible to everyone, but increasingly they are not. And I got to tell you, I'm from Pittsburgh. I live in Pittsburgh. I spent most of my life in the South or in the East Coast. And I've never been out here before. And it's truly breathtaking, these mountains. I've spent a little bit of time in Montana once for about 2 days in the middle of the summer, but to see these snow-capped peaks and to see the Tetons, it's just really, it's mesmerizing. And it's something that I think every person should see. It gives you a sense of life and of how we're part of this huge process. Increasingly, particularly because of the work from home revolution, the locals in these places are being priced out. Second homeowners, Airbnb, all these things. It's really hurting people. And it's something that could, it's interesting because, somebody is comparing, I was talking to someone the other day that, California has gotten so expensive that so many people from LA have moved to Denver.
Right.
And someone said recently that Denver is almost the new LA, but Bozeman, Montana is now the new Denver. And we were just up in Bozeman. There was a restaurant that was profiled by Guy Fieri. And we went up there and, this was profiled by Guy Fieri and they had fired staff for union organizing there. So, and Montana is really kind of a flip state. John Tester, they still have a Democratic senator.
Right.
Up until a few years ago, they had a Democratic governor, and it flips back. Yeah. And so you have a situation where it's both changing in a gentrification standpoint, but since there's so many people moving from the East Coast to places like Montana, you could start seeing a similar effect to what Bernie Sanders and other people did in Vermont. I mean, there's only 1 million people in Montana. So if 100,000, lefties and liberals come from, the coast, it could really have a positive effect. So we're seeing, it's a really hard time for a lot of folks in these regions, but it's also an appetite that's ripe for change.
Yeah, Mike Elk, it's so interesting because I think you put your finger on it, that this is really, you're talking about a part of the country where multiple forces are in play, making it an important story, right? One is the labor story. One is the privatization story. You mentioned that in any other developed country, it would be a government employee telling you about the park. In this country, 30 years ago, it would have been a government employee too. So there's the privatization dimension. There's the gentrification dimension. There's the political shift that might take place in places like this, and for sure the unaffordability. I've heard that Billings, Montana, homes have suddenly become $1 million, like regular ordinary homes are $1 million plus to buy now. So we're seeing also a kind of great displacement take place, and so you specifically have you talked to people who are organizing these? To me, first of all, the symbolism of like the fact that the people don't own the name Yellowstone anymore, and I don't think they own the name Yosemite either, by the way. But the symbolism of that basically says it all. But have you been covering any specific organizing among these groups here in these parks?
Yeah, we're meeting with some union organizers here today in West Yellowstone. We've been talking to them. There's actually an interesting, at Delaware North, they fired some union organizers. The National Labor Relations Board ordered them reinstated under Trump. The Trump administration didn't enforce it. And now those workers are appealing and asking the Biden administration to step in. Biden has talked extensively about the need for high road contracting, that we don't give contracts to these federal contractors that abuse workers. And I think certainly this year is a key test case of where that could go. So we're seeing unprecedented pushback in some of these places. We were meeting with the Montana AFL-CIO. You're seeing groups like DSA and other groups organized in places like Bozeman. We're going up to, actually, it's quite interesting. We're going to Butte, Montana, which I'm very excited about, which has very rich labor heritage. There were a lot of mine wars there.
Yep.
And there's some talk of turning that into a national labor heritage area, similar to what we have in Pittsburgh, in the steel heritage area there. And now that you also have in Lowell, Massachusetts, the Bread and Roses strike, that's now a national park. And with the New River Gorge in southern West Virginia being the newest national park, there's lots of placards and monuments in that part of West Virginia. So these parks are important. And they commemorate history.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mike, but I believe you're in Joe Hill country, more or less. Joe Hill being the great labor organizer, and a lot of the international workers of the world and all those folks. A lot of them were around the mines in Montana, weren't they?
Yeah, they were around the mines. And it's sort of interesting, the forces that drive the state of Montana. Tourism and public sector are the biggest employers here. And these are not public sector has been organized. Montana is still not a right to work state. They've been clinging on for a while. Mm-hmm. And actually, quite interestingly, Montana is the only state in the country where you have to show just cause to fire a worker.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
That's interesting.
So you have, a place that's really in flux, a place, I think, of popular imagination. And I think in these places of imagination, we need to really uplift these struggles. And that's sort of what we're doing out here with Payday Report. Our tagline is covering labor in news deserts. A lot of the local media here gets a lot of money from these contractors. They haven't really been willing to take on these abuses. And it shows. A lot of these papers are owned by some of these contractors, these little small town papers. And there's very little media. You could drive out here in the plains of Montana and you get into somewhere like Ennis, Montana, that has 1,000 people. That's the biggest town for, an hour or two. Uh-huh. And so you have a new sense of possibility, but you really have folks being uplifted and priced out by this influx of folks that have worked from home. And I think that's interesting because, we've seen a record strike wave during the pandemic of 1,800 workers striking, but we're also seeing negative effects. So, we have a lot of interesting forces. I got to be honest with you, this is going to sound trite. I'm a labor reporter. I covered the drug war in Brazil. I've covered some tough stuff in my life, and I don't get easily fazed by it. And, when it comes time to, really focus on covering a story, I tend to get in the zone. I joke, I was a pitcher in high school, and I tend to joke that it's like throwing a big ball game. You just get on the mound and you get in the zone. And in the early days of the pandemic, I was kind of excited. I mean, even though everything was happening was awful, because I knew, just based on my knowledge of the Civil War and World War II and other great calamities, that after any period of national sacrifice, we've lost over 1 million people to COVID.
Right.
Many of them are still dealing with sickness like I am. It's been nearly 3 months that I've been struggling with long COVID, which, for those that aren't familiar, long COVID is very real. I'm 36 and I'm having forgetfulness issues. I'm forgetting people's names. I'm not as quick or sharp as I used to be. I'm more tired. And hopefully, being out here in this air has really, really helped my lungs. So that's good. But it's we're in a period of flux right now in this country. And I think we really have to dig deep and look at some of these things. And I think the national parks are certainly important. And not just unionize the national parks, but make it easier for folks from all over to come and enjoy these places.
And, Mike, one of my big issues is the public economy, right? Privatization has been eating away at it, whether it's toll roads or parks or, dozens of other ways. And one of my big causes is explaining to people why the public economy is good and why having parks run by government officials, why having mass transit, operated by government employees, you name it, you go down, we could go down the list, why that's a good thing. And I think that's a big part of this story too, that public service used to be a cause. It should be a cause. Working for government is a noble thing to do. And it used to be that people wanted to be, and I think people still want to be, young people want to be park rangers, want to protect the environment, preserve it, explain its beauties to people that come through. That should not be a for-profit business. That should be the people providing service for each other. And I'm sorry to rant, but I think that that's really germane to what you're reporting on right now.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's important to bring up is that a lot of people do want to be park rangers. A lot of people do want to be tour guides. A lot of people do want to live in these places. And oftentimes what these parks and these contractors will do is they'll find young people.
Yeah.
They'll work them a couple seasons. These are folks that are, maybe they're getting money from mom and dad, or maybe they're just scraping by. Maybe they're living in company housing. I mean, even though the Park Service pays people, they're seasonal rangers about $16.70 an hour. And, they almost all have to work as seasonal rangers before becoming permanent rangers. They do provide some housing, and increasingly privatized housing. So, you have a lot of people that want to do this work, but it's not a very sustainable career. A lot of these towns have very bad alcoholism issues, a lot of drug issues here. Not much to do. Everybody knows everybody. And you have a situation where it's a really hard lifestyle. People that work out here, but they do it because they love it and they want to show people what these places look like. And, particularly park rangers during the pandemic, they had to enforce the federal mask mandate. So there were lots of confrontations.
Yeah. There. I'll bet. Oh, boy. And so in a sense, they're frontline, in a very real sense, they're frontline workers, too. And Mike, I want to make sure that I ask you before time runs out also. And again, we're talking with Mike Elk of the Payday Report. I want to make sure to ask you also about the current status of the strike tracker. You've been performing a great service, Payday Report, and I think Washington Post, or one of the major papers,
Washington Post.
Use your resources. See, I didn't remember. Use your resources on this. You've been tracking 1,800 strikes or something in the last couple of years in this country. What's the number?
In the last 2 years, we've tracked 1,800 strikes across the U.S. It's the biggest strike wave since World War II. And what's incredible is, we were just honored by Project Censored, which was great.
Great.
And what's incredible is that it took so much to the mainstream media and even the left press. I mean, Boots Riley pointed this out about our work, that a lot of the left press didn't pick up on how big it was to realize this. But, I've been a labor reporter for 15 years. I spent 35 years in the labor movement. My father's a union organizer. I grew up in a union neighborhood in a union family near a plant where my father was a union rep. And, I knew something was happening just based on my own gut, which I think is also an argument for why we need more veteran labor reporters. Because I think there's probably only, I have 15 years, and there's probably only like 6 or 7 labor reporters in the country that have more than a decade on the beat, still working full time.
And major newspapers, Mike, they don't have labor reporters anymore. I think the last one was Stephen Greenhouse at the New York Times. So to me, it blows me away that pick up any newspaper in this country, there'll be a section called business, which might as well be called bosses. And there isn't even a section. Yeah, there isn't even an on-staff labor reporter while they're devoting all this to to the corporatist perspective. Labor reporting is almost, could be a dying art if it weren't for guys like you.
Well, yeah, we raised $100,000 off our readers last year. And, if it weren't for those kind of readers, we wouldn't be able to cover these stories. We wouldn't know there was 1,800 strikes. The BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, came out with their strike numbers last week. They said there was something like 15 strikes last year. We counted 580. Quite a bit of a difference there. And
how do you figure the difference? How do you collect your information versus how they collect their information?
So we collect our information through news links, through things that our readers send in, through social media links. So in my opinion, even though we counted 587, there were certainly a lot of strikes that we just didn't find that happened, that didn't get local news coverage, or we couldn't find through Twitter searches or Reddit searches. You now have, speaking of Reddit, you have a group on Reddit called Anti-Work, which has over 2 million followers, which has done all kind of wild projects. Look at, you're up to nearly 120 Starbucks stores unionizing. REI, the big outdoor retailer, just voted to unionize in New York. So we're seeing, particularly among the contingent workforce, particularly among people that have a lot of college debt, we're seeing a lot of organizing. We're seeing a lot of organizing in Latino communities. We're seeing a lot of organizing in Black communities, particularly. And I think one of the real unwritten stories that, we're thinking about going down to North Carolina to cover. I think one of the unwritten stories is that there have been an unprecedented wave of wildcat strikes by Black public workers in the South in places they don't have collective bargaining rights. So, while the Starbucks campaigns get a lot of attention, they're young folks or college educated, while places like REI get a lot of attention, if you look at what we're tracking, we're tracking bus drivers striking in places like Raleigh, and Howard County, Maryland, and all these kind of places. If you look at those efforts, we're seeing that there's a real cross-section of Americans that are organizing in new ways. Look, recently there was even an architect union drive in New York City at a firm. They lost, but then they launched 6 other union drives. So, we're in an era of daring ambition. People who just went through enormous trauma and they don't want to go back to the old way. People sacrificed. And, I bring it up a lot, but Dave Dane of the American Prospect, I think, wrote the best article on this called The Great Escape. And during the pandemic, people had a break from their normal lives and they thought about different lives. And we're in a period of flux. To circle back to the rents going up here. They're going to have to start having discussions. Some of these towns, I was just in Victor, Idaho, the size of Victor, Idaho, which is about a half hour from Jackson, Wyoming. It doubled in the last 10 years, the population. And they're building on another 500 to about 2,000 people. And they're building on another 500 units. So we're going to see big changes out here. But I think these changes are emblematic of what's happening all over the country.
Yeah. And this, what Dave Dayen calls the Great Escape, other people have called it the Great Resignation, or what's that term that the demand?
So the Great Resignation, 25% of all Americans quit their jobs in 2021. And Robert Reich has dubbed this the unofficial general strike, which I agree with. Back to the issue of strike tracking, BLS counted 15 strikes. last year, and they only count strikes above 1,000 workers. Another tracker at Cornell, using an outdated definition, tracked 260 strikes. We tracked 580. The difference being that Cornell won't count non-union strikes. But my argument is that in an era when it's so difficult to join a union, half of all union drives fail, that workers aren't waiting around for big unions to form. They're getting on Twitter, they're getting on Facebook, they're getting into group messages, and they're organizing. And they're changing jobs. I mean, we just saw an instance in Arizona where an entire restaurant quit and then all got jobs at a new restaurant in town. The whole crew left. We're seeing that, and I think in the digital age, in the COVID age, the way that people are organizing is changing. And so we're out here trying to cover that. We have the most comprehensive strike track in the country. It's maintained through reader support. Folks who want to support us can go to paydayreport.com. Really great resource.
No, I 100% agree, and I endorse that people should contribute to Payday Report. I do myself. And, to me, Mike, the term is organized labor. It's not just unions. It's whenever people get together and organize an action to change their working conditions, right? That is what you track. That is what should be tracked. That's what a strike is. There were strikes before there were unions. There were unions grew out of work actions, not the other way around. So as much as I'm a supporter of unions, we've got to use the broader definition that you use. And we've got to understand that, to me, that one of the reasons, but I'd love your thoughts, one of the reasons why so many people quit their jobs in 2021 was, to read the mainstream press on this, people say, oh, we don't know. They just don't like their jobs. Well, I'll bet if they paid people more, it's what economics 101, not that many people would quit. The fact is people don't want to do the work they're offered under the conditions they have to do it for the wages and benefits that are being offered. And that, to me, is what they're seeing pushback on. And organized labor is a way to turn that resistance into a force that actually changes working conditions in this country. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah, this makes sense to me. And I just think, unions are so traditional. They're bureaucracies. And, you could be in a union process where it could take a year or two to get a contract. Right. Folks are moving much quicker than that. If you look at what happened in the Starbucks campaign, they organized like 120 stores in a little over 2 months. They didn't have that capacity. It's people doing it DIY, people getting on social media, getting on Reddit, talking to other union organizers. And this continues a trend that I saw really prevalent in the West Virginia teacher strike, which took everyone by surprise 4 years ago. Right. Teachers in West Virginia went on this unprecedented strike, and even their union leaders tried to end the strike, and folks got it. So, we were organizing and just said no. And then that inspired teachers in Oklahoma to strike, and in Arizona and Kentucky and North Carolina. And, I get nostalgic thinking about it because I went to all those places. Right. And now seeing, it's just not the pandemic. I mean, we were laying the work pre-pandemic. I mean, you look at the digital media unionization movement where, we went from about 15% of digital media being unionized to about 80 in just 5 years. You look at what's happening all over. I mean, I saw, the groundwork for this was laid in the Fight for 15, in the teacher strikes, in the Black Lives Matter movement, in the Days Without Immigrants movement. And so this has been festering, and now there's this opportunity. And I was saying this earlier, it's an exciting time to be a labor reporter because there's so much action. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It must be really great and really exciting to do it. And before we go, Mike, I wanted to, remind our audience that those teacher strikes you're talking about were in the so-called red state teacher strikes. They were not, in liberal, what are considered liberal parts of the country, but they were union efforts. They displayed solidarity by the West Virginia teachers, for example, also
striking for better conditions for students, better wages for correction workers, better correction officers rather, and custodial staff as well as themselves. So they showed solidarity, and they had huge support from the communities they were in, whether it was in West Virginia, and correct me if I'm wrong, but whether West Virginia, Oklahoma, Arizona. So to me, that points to a potential new movement, coalition for labor organizing that is not limited by what people think of as the typical left-right divide. Workers want to organize, and I think we're potentially on the brink of a whole new wave of organizing. But what do you think? I'll give you the last word.
Well, I agree with you. I think we're on the brink of a whole new wave of organizing. And I think we need to build a media system to help cover that organizing.
You bet.
I mean, it's somewhat pathetic how much of the national media is located in three cities: New York, DC, LA. Right. Increasingly, we're seeing a lot of people in Philly now, because Philly is only an hour and change, according to which train you take from New York. But outside of those, and Chicago, but outside of those five cities, you don't see many national voices. I mean, I was talking with someone yesterday who's not on Twitter or anything, who was a New Yorker who's lived in Montana for years. And I was saying, how much I feel like even being in Pittsburgh, I know about the New York mayor's race.
Right.
Because of
you're right.
The discussion. Whereas, it was really disappointing being in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, we knocked off an incumbent mayor for the first time in 80 years. We elected the first black mayor of Pittsburgh in a city that's 25% black, that's been rated one of the worst cities in America for black people consistently by various polling. And it was barely a national story. It was a paragraph or two. And I think, we have to not just build a media, but do things. And what I like, what Labor Lab is doing here, they're tracking union busters. They're creating a database of union busters so that when a union buster deploys, we can know his skill set. We can know who they are. We can track them down. And with this information, it's important. And Labor Lab is trying to build up their own capacity here in Montana. And, I think that's the biggest challenge. I get so frustrated with the left and their critique of corporate media, and then them giving money to institutions in the media that don't treat workers well. In the left press, places that pay $150 a story. I mean, look at Jacobin. Certainly came to power that way. And now Bhaskar Sankara is considered a genius and was named the president of the nation. And there's nothing genius about exploiting workers to underbad something. I mean, at Payday Report, we pay all our folks $32 an hour minimum.
Good for you.
And so, I mean, because I've been in the left press. I mean, I know how it is. And, we can't quite afford full-time folks. But, when the hours folks do work, I want to make sure it's a consistent, we have a salaried employee who we pay about a half-time salary, a little less because we don't quite have enough capacity. We want to get up there. And so, I think this is where we're at, is that we have to build something new to cover this stuff. I mean, who would have heard about all this union busting in Montana if we didn't come out here, if I didn't have a couple friends out here?
Yeah, it's a great story. And this is why I agree with you 100%. And I'm going to say in conclusion for our audience listening, one great way to start building that infrastructure, besides, of course, supporting the 0 Hour, is to support Payday Report and Mike Elk. Mike and Payday do fantastic work. I really recommend you check them out and contribute as well. Get on the mailing list. So, Mike, have a great...
One last thing before I go. I
Always
say this.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if you ever heard of this independent movie house in DC called Sun Cinema.
No, that's weird that I don't know it. I live here. Yeah.
It's in Mount Pleasant. My friend Ryan Mitchell, he owns it. And last time I was on, he texted me like, "Oh man, just heard you on the Eskow Hour, the 0 Hour." Oh. And he was talking about what a big fan he was. So I wanted to say hi to Ryan and encourage people to go up to Sun Cinema in Mount Pleasant. They do a lot of left-wing movies, small little theater with a bar. You should definitely go up there, Richard. Apparently you have some fans up there.
No question. Ryan Mitchell, I apologize for not already knowing about Sun Cinema, but you can bet I'll be there. And so thanks for that shout out, Mike. I'm sure he appreciates it, and I do too. Have a fantastic trip. Again, my guest has been Mike Elk, Payday Report, and I hope we talk to you soon.
You too. Thanks so much.
You bet. We'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.